instead of using a taxi or a bike or service like that, they would have contracts with TNCs that would take them to and from the locations that they need to go.
Well, you see the handle that gives the federal government right there to begin with, and as this committee will be very interested.
Well, Congresswoman, Chairwoman, that piece concerns us greatly because, again, I'm not here to say we're anti-Uber or anti-Lyft because we're not. This new opportunity with the federal government could be business for all of our companies. But when you have when the incidents that we're seeing today continue to rise and escalation of violence against passengers, just the news media today, we're here in part because we've had two congressmen come and talk about Sammy and the horrible tragedy that happened to her. What happens if that happens to a government employee? That is going to be on the front page of every newspaper, every news outlet for weeks and weeks and weeks, and those business opportunities are going to go away for all of us. So,
well, it's the obligation of this committee to see that it doesn't happen to government employees and that it doesn't happen to the public any longer. I don't understand the difficulty in getting statistics, and this is another role Congress can play. What about law enforcement agencies? Is there no is that a role for the federal government? Why is it that we do not even have good information to begin with?
I can answer that a little bit.
Mr. Miller.
If you're in a taxi cab accident or there's an incident, you have law enforcement that will show up, and you will have the taxi commission, somebody representing the taxi commission there to take statements and file those types of reports. What we have today with TNCs, you don't have those types of police. The law enforcement may show up, but it's not going to be ticketed or written up as a TNC type of violation or accident because they're just regular people owning vehicles. So there is no way to distinguish what they are and who they are.
Yeah, which means that the committee has to work with law enforcement to find ways to make sure we get this information. Mr. Willis, I was interested to read that drivers on the West Coast were seeking to organize. It seems to me that that was a hopeful, move. Could you tell us more about that, please?
Well, I think what you're seeing across the board is Uber and Lyft drivers wanting some type of union representation, a union voice because of the terrible wages and benefits that we see in the industry.
I mean, you report as little as $3.75 an hour.
Yeah, I mean that's that really goes to the problem, and it goes to the issue of the independent contractor status that you raised. And in California specifically, the legislator has passed a new law that we believe will ensure that these workers are treated as employees, and that is a good path forward. There's going to be more work needs to be done, as the governor has mentioned, but I think making sure that those workers are at least are given the protections of employees and collective bargaining rights is absolutely essential. And I think the fact that Uber and Lyft, the law isn't even dried yet, the ink on the paper, and they're committing to spend $60–70 million to overturn that. So I think you see the real problem here with the way that these companies think about their drivers.
Yeah, they're terrified at organization, and more terrified at organization than they are, I think, of the Congress itself. Finally, I'd like to ask Mayor Freeman Wilson about her testimony about affordability. You want to spread these, and their present state, you want to spread these to low-income communities, to the disabled? Why aren't they going into those communities in the first place?
Thank you for that question, Chair Norton. I think that in many instances, you find that there is not the opportunity to use TNCs in the community.
Well, do those communities call for TNCs? Do they dial and say, I need an Uber or Lyft? Or is it that Uber and Lyft refuses to go to those communities?
No, I don't think there's a refusal to go into our communities. I think it's the availability of people who may or may not be working for TNCs. In many instances, they require insurance, they require certain types of vehicles, and when you have communities with higher poverty levels, you just don't find those willing and able drivers that you may find in some of the larger.
Well, I don't know why drivers from more affluent communities can't go into those communities as well. I mean, if you get a call, can't you just go to the community where the call has come from?
Well, a lot of times you find that they may be 15 minutes away, and generally when someone is looking for an Uber or Lyft, they are looking for that ride in 3 to 5 minutes.
That is certainly the
Could I
case.
add something to that, Chair?
Yes, please.
When it comes to this type of ride that you're talking about, some of the challenge becomes that the TNCs don't have the appropriate vehicles. They don't have wheelchair-accessible vehicles to pick these folks up, so that does become a challenge. In a lot of communities, taxi companies are required to have a certain percentage of their fleet wheelchair-accessible vehicles. So on the other side of the equation, TNCs don't have that same requirement.
Yeah, well, thank you for pointing that out, and I'm going to go to the ranking member now for his questions. Indeed, you point out the difference between how taxis are regulated and how these TNCs are virtually unregulated. Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for your testimony. Great to see some folks again